Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Gaming and a new video on the channel going over a 10 Divine Smite build for people who are trying to copy the build I'm playing and are struggling to put it together. Now this is a precise technique non-crit build, and the main reason for that is that I wanted to use swords and the base crit on swords is really bad. It's going to cost a lot of currency to get a decent amount of crit and crit multi. It does mean that the ceiling for this build is probably lower than crit, but once you get it invested with currency, it can easily do T17s and pretty much any content that you want it to do. The footage in the background is the character I just put together on its first map test after around 10 to 11 divines of investment. It is a pretty juicy Guardian map with extra life, damage and attack speed. If you like what you see, stay tuned as I'm going to go through how to build the character from scratch. The build is going to be really good at most T16 Atlas strats, and it's a ton of fun to play as Vaal Smite just blows up entire screens and it comes up fairly quickly. Like I said, with investment it can move to T17 map farming if that's what you want to do. The video is going to go through how to put the build together, including crafting tutorials, and what to do to increase the build further if you find that you enjoy it. The good news is that if you don't like it, most of the gear can be used to put together a meta lightning strike character. So with the intro out of the way, let's move on to how to gear the character, the skill gems and links, and then I'll go through how much each item cost and how I decided to go about crafting them. Okay, so let's dive in. Now this build is not really designed for experienced players, but more for people who want a fun melee build without having to worry about complicated gearing or mechanics. The main things you'll need to do on this build are get enough mana and reduced attack costs for it to feel comfy running 350% auras and a very low level precision if needed. You're going to need some strength and intelligence as the requirements on both are pretty high. Obviously you need to cap resistances and get as much positive chaos resistance as you can. You also want to keep up Fortify as long as possible, which we'll come on to when we get to the skill gems. And you want to use your Vaal skill and your tinctures for burst boss damage. The way I've put the build together, once you've got all your gear, the only thing you should really need to do is maybe swap a resistance in harvest if you're well over on one particular resistance, and maybe get a couple of jewels to finish capping your resistances and attributes. There's a few spare sockets in the build and I'm not sure what to do with them yet, but feel free to use any gems that you want to in there. So we'll start with the weapon because that's going to be one of the most expensive items. What you want to do is buy a fractured base. It needs to be a one-handed sword. It can either be an eternal sword, a graceful sword, or a corsair sword. What you're looking for is a fractured base with 26% or more attack speed. Once you've got your base, you're going to use a deafening essence of wrath until you've got an open prefix. You're then going to craft elemental damage penetrates resistances. The most expensive part of this sword is in the rune craft because we want ele weakness on hit. It is expensive, but it's much cheaper than buying a really good curse on hit ring. So the total cost of the base for me was 30 chaos, then it's 1 to 2 essences, so either 3 or 6 chaos, 1 exalt for the craft, and then the rune craft. The essences you want to use are deafening essences of wrath to guarantee big lightning damage. For your shield, you want an armor and evasion base. Cardinal round shield is probably the best base, but any armor evasion base will work. You either want to get fractured elemental resistances or fractured life. What we're looking for on a finished shield is life, some resistances, and chance to avoid elemental ailments of around 32% or higher. To get this, it's very easy. Once you've got your fractured base, you're going to go to harvest and you're going to craft with either fire, cold, or lightning. It uses 50 life force each, and that has a chance to roll avoid elemental ailments. T1 is 31 to 35%. You ideally want 32% or higher. So you're just going to keep using this 50 life force roll until you get your resistances and craft life, or you get resistances and craft another resistance. So my shield, the base costs me 12 chaos. The life force, you're going to do maximum of 70c. It should be around 40 to 50c to get your item. So you're looking at between 60 chaos to 80 chaos for your completed shield. So let's move on to the helmet. For your base, I recommend the Conquest helmet. They're the second highest armor and evasion base, so it should be fairly affordable to get a fractured base. You're essentially looking for a fracture of either fire, cold, or lightning resistance. And what we're looking for on this helmet is big intelligence because we are going to be short on intelligence. So we want to be crafting this helmet with deafening essences of spite. And what we're looking for is another resistance of around 30% or higher, and then an open prefix to craft life. The odds of hitting this are about 12 to 13 to 1, and the essences are about 5 chaos. So you can look on average at 60 to 65 chaos to get the craft for your helmet. And then if you have an open prefix, you're just going to craft life. For the implicits, I'm using lesser icons and embers throughout the build to keep the cost down. You want to roll reduced mana cost of attacks with your red currency and increased mana reservation efficiency with your blue currency. These should all be fairly cheap to roll because you can buy multiples of these currencies for 1 chaos. So what you'll be left with is a helmet with some life, big intelligence, 1 big resistance, and then a medium resistance on the item. For the amulet, for the budget variant, we're going to go Ashes of the Stars. It's around 60 chaos to get a roll of 25% or higher to quality of all skill gems. That's the only mod that we need to change. We're going to allocate Frenetic, which is a cost in itself because it needs 2 silver oils. This gives us an extra frenzy charge. The Anoint is 2 silver oils and an azure oil. So in combination, this amulet should cost you about 180 chaos. If you want to spend a bit more, I'd recommend rolling attribute modifiers just to lift those all attributes a tiny bit, and then roll this with blessed orbs until you max out your attribute implicit. For the belt, we're going to go a cheap unique called Perseverance, get as higher maximum life and maximum cold resistance roll as you can, and use blessed orbs to push the armor and evasion up as high as you can. This belt gives us big attack damage based on our lowest armor or evasion, and we're going to be stacking quite a bit of armor and evasion. It also gives us onslaught when we're fortified, and essentially as long as we've hit an enemy recently, we're going to be fortified. So this belt just gives a big bang for its buck for a very, very cheap price. You're probably talking 2 to 3 chaos for a well-rolled belt. We'll move on to the rings next. These can be any type of elemental resistance ring. They can be 2 stone ring, or they can be any of the rings that give fire, cold, or lightning resistance. For your first ring, you want to get big fractured intelligence. For your second ring, you want to get relatively high fractured life. These should be fairly cheap because we can use any resistance base. You shouldn't really be paying more than 20 to 25C for each of these rings. So 1 fractured intelligence, 1 fractured life. For both the rings, we're going to be crafting in Harvest. We're going to be crafting Reforged Chaos more likely. It costs 100 yellow life force. The reason for this is it guarantees chaos resistance. So for your one that has intelligence, you're going to roll with chaos resistance until you hit 1 other resistance of 30% or higher. Then you're just going to craft maximum life. If you get anything good on your prefixes, it's a bonus. But that's all we need for this ring. So at the end, you're going to have a ring with big intelligence, big chaos resistance, 1 mediocre resistance, and crafted life. For your ring that already has the life fractured on it, again, we're going to use Reforged Chaos in the Harvest. Again, we're going to look for 1 resistance, but what we also want is an open prefix so that we can craft non-channeling skills on the bench. So at the end of it, you're going to have an item that has very big life, big chaos resistance, a mediocre resistance, and then non-channeling skills crafted onto the item. Again, make sure you use a Blessed Orb to max your implicits on the ring to get the most resistances out of it. If you end up being short of intelligence, you can use Intrinsic Catalyst on your ring because it should get you around 6 to 10 more intelligence. Moving on to the gloves, I recommend Chimera Scale Gauntlets that are second highest armor and evasion base. What we need to get on these gloves is massive accuracy, so I recommend getting as big a fractured accuracy roll as you can. If these end up being too expensive, you can drop down to something like Dragon Scale Gauntlets and they should be nice and cheap. In terms of the implicits, again, we're just using lessers. You want chance to suppress spell damage from your blue, and then non-Vaal Strike skills target 1 additional nearby enemy from your red. All we're looking for these gloves is attack speed, life, and increased damage while leeching. So what you're going to do is use Deafening Essences of Zeal. These are about 5 chaos each. You're going to roll until you get any life roll of 50 or above with an open prefix to craft increased damage while leeching. It should be around 10 essences to hit your life with an open prefix, so around 50 chaos, and then it's 1 exalt to craft damage while leeching. So overall for these gloves, you're looking probably around 110 chaos for the finished item, but what you get is a ton of damage. We get big attack speed, massive accuracy, and damage while leeching. Anything else you get is a bonus. Moving on to the boots, it's no surprise to you to hear that I recommend Chimera Scale. Again, second biggest armor and evasion base. If they're too expensive, just drop down again to something like Dragon Scale. What you need for these is 30% fractured movement speed because you can't craft decent movement speed on boots. So it's very, very wise to get this fractured. For implicits, this is the only time we're going to use graters, and it's for the eye cores to roll chance to avoid elemental ailments. Use your greater blue eye cores to roll chance to avoid elemental ailments, and then lesser red embers to roll increased action speed. Now we need to find elemental ailment avoidance of 31% or higher on these boots. To do that, we're going to use a Deafening Essence of Loathing. These are very cheap this league. They're 3 chaos in bulk. So you're going to roll these essences until you essentially get 1 big resistance and an open prefix to craft life. That's it. If you end up getting lucky and getting double resist, even better. Or if you end up getting life and a resist, then you can use your craft to add even more resistances to the items. But as you can see on the ones that I was using on our character, we hit 1 big resistance, tiny amount of chaos resistance. Then I just crafted life and that's the boots finished. These boots, along with a shield and some nodes that we're going to take on the tree, mean we can get to that 100% avoid elemental ailment cap, so we can totally ignore ailments. And then finally, we're going to move on to the body armor. For this one, I recommend a Marshall's Brigandine because they're quite a bit cheaper than the highest base. I purchased this 6-link uncorrupted for 30 chaos. You should pay a similar amount for those. There are lots on the market. For the implicits, again, we're just going to use lessers. We want Wrath has increased aura effect with your blues, and increase effect of non-curse auras from your skills for the reds. For this, we're really just looking for life, resistances, and if you can, armor and evasion and additional fizz damage reduction is a massive bonus, but don't expect necessarily to roll it. I would recommend to keep the cost down, just use Deafening Essences of Greed. You can roll really high life with that, and then just keep using them until you get some resistances, armor, or resistances and strength. If you do end up with an open prefix, you can either craft increased armor and evasion if you don't have that, or increase life and increase maximum mana. This is an item that can be upgraded a lot later on in the build, but it does get quite expensive, so something simple and fairly cheap works really well at this stage. My body armor in total cost me 92 chaos to buy the base, roll the implicits, roll with essences, and then craft on top of it. For the colors, we want 5 red and 1 blue. So to get this, you're going to use a crafting bench and just use craft 1 blue minimum socket and just keep using that until you get your 5 red and 1 blue. So let's move on to the flasks. For your life flask, you want something to remove corrupted blood and bleed. I recommend a Divine Life Flask. Instant use is really good, but increased recovery rate is also decent. Remember to quality up all your flasks. For your Quicksilver Flask, I use Chance to Avoid Being Stunned, but Reduce Effective Curses is also really good. You're going to have a Granite Flask to give us more armor, and we always want increased armor during effect as high as you can get. For the Jade Flask, again, Evasion Flask, evasion rating as the suffix. And then lastly, we are using a Tincture to get big elemental damage when it's up. This is going to be used on every boss. The one I use at the moment, because it was fairly cheap on trade, is increase elemental damage with melee weapons. Melee weapon damage penetrates resistances and increase cooldown recovery rate. There are probably better tinctures. I'm quite new with these kind of items, but this is working really well for me and does give an amazing boost at bosses. In terms of the gem links, as you can see, we've got quite a few empty sockets because I don't really know what to put in there. So feel free to fill these sockets with any gems you think you might be able to use in the build. So let's start with the main 6-link. The first one, which goes off the screen because it's so big, is Vaal Smite. I recommend getting a 2020 because we push up the quality with Ashes of the Stars. They do cost around a divine, but they're well worth the currency. It also gets boosted 1 level by Ashes. When we get one of our support gems to level 5, that gets boosted again. So you'll end up with what is basically a level 22 smite. The first support gem is Awakened Added Lightning Damage. These are around 20 to 30 C. Get it up to 20% quality. Once this hits level 5, it adds 1 to lightning skill gems. We are using Fortify support because this is the easiest way to guarantee Fortify in the build. A lot of your clear will come from your area, which doesn't count as melee. So we can't use the implicit on the body armor to get a chance to Fortify because it's hardly ever up. The only other cheap option is to use 6 or 7 points to get it on the tree. So I'd rather take the compromise and use Fortify support. If you decide to upgrade the build, there's ways to get rid of it later on. The next support gem is Multi-Strike, gives massive attack speed. 2020 gives a little bit of extra melee damage as well. Volatility support just to make those lightning damage hit higher, which means you can get slightly higher shocks. Again, 2020. And then lastly, inspiration support. Again, not the biggest damage gem in the world, but for quality of life and lowering the mana cost, I really like it still for attack build. So again, 2020. In terms of auras, it's a level 21 determination if you can afford it, 21 grace, and then 21 wrath. Level 20 for these is absolutely fine. It doesn't make very much difference at all. You may need a precision to cap your accuracy. So just put a precision gem in, level it as high as you need to meet the accuracy requirements. Flame Dash is just used to get out of grasping vines. We're going to use Leap Slam for our main movement skill. You could also use Whirling Blades. So we'll come on to that. It's Leap Slam. It doesn't really have to be leveled because that just adds damage. Linked to faster attacks. And then we've also got a Blood Rage in here for extra attack speed and Frenzy Charge generation when mapping. Let's say if you don't like Leap Slam, it's perfectly fine to use Whirling Blades. And then finally in our gloves, we have a Molten Shell, Automation, and then more duration support. Level them all as high as you can and get them qualityed if you can. And that's it. They're the only gems I use. I haven't worked out a really good use of the spare sockets. As I say, feel free to put whatever you like in there if you want to try different things out. So this tree has lots of increased accuracy tattoos. That is because on my main build with my more investment, I need these to get to accuracy cap. You probably won't need it. If you do fall slightly short of accuracy, these are really cheap, so you can just put them onto any dexterity node. So I won't run through the entire tree. I'll just talk through really what the build revolves around. And that's precise technique. We're not going crit. We're just going, as long as accuracy is above your life, you're going to do 40% more damage. If you're ever not sure, go to your hideout or a combat zone, offense, click on smite, and then it'll tell you here that your main hand accuracy is 4,612. You just have to be aware that things like blind and less accuracy map mods are going to affect that massively. And it might mean that you fall under that and do a lot less damage. We're taking both Disciple of the Slaughter and Unyielding to get endurance charges and frenzy charges on kill, along with lots of extra effects of these charges. Because we are stacking charges, 3% damage per charge works really well. You could, if you wanted to forgo the damage, take 100% increased charge duration to make sure that your endurance charges are 100% going to be up for boss fights, but I haven't found that it's necessary. We're taking Leader of the Pack along with Charisma and this Mastery here for more reservation efficiency. You are going to need to take all of these to fit all the skills in. I also like Thrill of Battle and the small node leading to it just because it reduces your attack cost massively. If we have a look here, my attack cost is 9. I've got plenty of mana because I don't need a precision. So we can actually run this mana down to probably 80 or 90. We could realistically maybe even get rid of this here. And the build's actually still fine, so it kind of frees up another point. But I don't know exactly what accuracy you're going to have, so this is there just as kind of a fail-safe. We're taking the leech nodes here just to get even more maximum recovery and then instant leech as well. This just makes the build feel really nice. You're going to be over-leeching about 1,500 life per second, and you've got instant leech on top of that. So what you might need to do, unless you get lucky and get suppression on your shield, is take suppressed chances lucky. Only because we don't actually take all these life nodes. So it's not as easy to get to these suppression nodes here because that's actually going to take you 4 points to take these 2. If you were only short a tiny bit, you can maybe take the 1 node here for 5%. But this is a nice boost. We don't need to be 100% in softcore. So if you are around 90%, this will just boost it up quite a few percent. We're taking the Mastery here to get 15% suppression because all our gear's got evasion on it. Mastery here to invert resistances every 4th hit. Ignore this life mastery because we now have life on our body armor, so it doesn't do anything. So this will leave us at a level 94 tree. If you can drop that as well, it's 93. If you were 91, you would drop the reservation mastery here and the reservation mastery here. They just give small amounts of damage. We're also taking these onslaught nodes because we are going to be onslaught pretty much all the time. These give a big boost to the onslaught effect and armor and evasion. And then here we're taking 8% increased armor and evasion per charge, and we have 7 of each. In terms of ascendancy, it is Masterful Form, Brutal Fervor, Bane of Legends, and Headsman. And the last thing to go over in terms of your gear is going to be the jewels. You're going to want a Lethal Pride. I would recommend getting one with 2% strength and 1 double damage. I'll quickly show you how to search for those jewels in a minute. The jewels in this large cluster on here are what you're going to use if you are slightly short on attributes or slightly short on resistances. If you're not, you want to pack as much attack speed and life in here as you can, or just use them like I have here, a few attributes and a bit of speed, some lightning resistance and a little bit of attack speed. You can use a Watcher's Eye. I'd recommend increased lightning damage while affected by Wrath because it's fairly cheap. Even one rolled at 55% was about a divine. And lastly, we'll just move on to the cluster jewels. These, when I purchased them, were 80C. If they go up insanely, there are other things you can do. What you're looking for is Drive the Destruction, Feed the Fury, and Martial Prowess on a attack damage while holding a shield, because these seem to be the cheapest, with 8 passive skills. What you're looking to do is have Drive the Destruction at the back. The way you know which notable pulls at the back is the order they appear on the trade site. The middle skill is always going to be the one that appears at the back. So you'd want Drive the Destruction here, Martial Prowess, and then Feed the Fury. As long as they're in that order and the middle one is the one you don't want to take, you're absolutely fine. If the shield ones end up absolutely expensive, bow ones are quite cheap, and the only thing it offers you is a small node that gives you damage. So this small node here that gives us 12% attack damage with the shield would just be a bow node, so it'd be essentially wasted, but that's the only difference. It's 12% increased damage, which is hardly anything. So you want 2 clusters with Martial Prowess, Feed the Fury, Drive the Destruction, 8 passives. And then we've got 2 small cluster jewels. We've got an Armor, 2 passive Enduring Composure. You're just going to craft this with alterations, augments, and regals. It will only cost you probably 40 to 50 alterations. And then we have a 2 passive Mana Reservation one. Again, craft this with alterations until you hit Sublime Form. Gives us some resistances and gives us more Mana Reservation efficiency for Grace. And that's kind of it. It looks expensive when you look at the gear and the clusters, but I spent, I think, 11 divines, and I overpaid for all my crafting materials on the exchange because I just wanted to get them purchased. So overall, I think 10 to 15 divines, even if the market lifts a little bit, is going to get you this build, and it is a ton of fun to play. In terms of Pantheons, I always run Solar Lunaris. I really like it. This character is made for mapping. Get all these filled out. It gives good bonuses to defense and attack. For your miner, Cannot Be Blinded, Cannot Be Maimed is really good because it means we don't have to worry about getting blinded and our accuracy dropping. If you run something like Syrian Exarch Altars, Burning Ground is also good, but because we overleech so much, this probably isn't necessary. A good one for bosses is Soul of Gruthkul, because enemies have reduced attack speed if they've hit you recently, and you get some extra physical damage reduction. In terms of bandits, it's kill all. If you're desperate for resistances, you could take Alira. And now we'll just talk about how to play the build, because there's a few important things you need to do to make sure you're maximizing damage. We'll go through and just very quickly run through a map and demonstrate it in a moment anyway. So the first is, if you've not used Vaal skills, you actually get 2 skills on the same gem. So you'd assign your Smite to 1 button, and then this one with a 0 is your Vaal one. You'll put that to a 2nd button. What Vaal Smite does is twofold. Firstly, it obliterates screens of enemies when you use it. Secondly, it gives you a higher Smite buff, which gives you more lightning damage. So you want to use it on a boss to increase your damage, along with using your Tincture. That's how you're going to get enough single target to melt bosses fairly quickly. Use your Tincture, you'll use your Vaal Smite, and then the last tip is, like Lightning Strike, Smite can double hit. So if you stand just slightly away, so where Fustus is there, and you just hit it, you'll hit him with his melee and the AoE, and it will do double damage. It's not as much as Lightning Strike because it's not a projectile, so you can't boost it up with things like Point Blank, but it's definitely an increase in single target. So just to demonstrate the build on how to play it, we'll go and do a quick map. I'm going to do Toxic Sewer because I think it demonstrates really well on the boss how much Vaal Smite can overlap. And sometimes the Vaal Smite will kill the boss because of all the ads around it. So we'll go and we'll put some Syrian Exarch Altars on. This is normally a Delhi tree, but I don't want to go Delhi on this map because it's not a very good one for it. This is really just to demonstrate how to play the build, and I don't want loads of things to get in the way. So the only time you're going to be vulnerable is right at the beginning, because you won't have your charges, and until you hit that first enemy you won't have Fortify. But it's kind of just a case of leap slamming or whirling blades around and hitting Smite and everything dies. You've got your Vaal Smite, which you can use, and then it will blow up a whole screen. We'll go in here and we'll do it again. It's just a ton of fun to use. So we'll you'll kind of map like that. The Vaal Smite comes back really quickly. And then you've got your Tincture to use on kind of dangerous enemies. So we'll go and try and find the boss. Oh, that's good, he's here. So with this boss, you want to do your Tincture, run in, Vaal Smite, and then start hitting. And you can see the Vaal Smite alone took about 75% of that boss's health because he had some ads around him. So maps like this where you get quite a few ads on the boss is just a dream for this kind of skill. So we'll just go and kill a few more monsters, and then we'll go and get out of here. And then we got one more Vaal Smite to use. We'll try and get this strong bots first. It's just a ton of fun. And yeah, that's kind of it. That's kind of how you play the build. You shouldn't really have to worry about positioning to double hit because everything will die. But if you decide you want to go and do, you know, Guardians, Conquerors, things like that, you're probably going to need to do it to make sure you're maximizing your DPS. But that is a character as I built it on 11 Divines. It's an absolute ton of fun for mapping. It will handle most mapping strategies. Single target isn't the best. Smite is quite weak for single target, but as long as you're not juicing things with 5 Deli Orbs or putting 100 massive rogue exiles into the map, you should be absolutely fine for the majority of mechanics. And then there are ways to push the build up to a lot more damage. So what I'll do is just go through a few things that you can do if you play this character and you like the playstyle, you like precise technique and not worrying about crit. There's some things you can do to massively increase your damage. The first thing you would do is obviously get better implicit. So instead of rolling with lessers, you roll with greaters. You maybe try and push them up to grand. For your gloves, you'd get +2 strike instead of +1. You'd roll suppression also on your shield so that you then don't have to have this lucky node. For your sword, this is obviously a super cheap craft taking away the elemental weakness. You already have that on your sword and you've got your fractured attack speed. So what I did is I rolled my lightning damage essences until I also hit big cold. Then I've crafted Ellie Pen. It's just more damage and the cold means you get a little bit of chill on enemies to slow them down. Increase your armor and evasion where you can, it massively helps. I think a rare amulet would be more damage if you could stack something like T1 lightning damage, Ellie damage with attacks, life and some attributes that would outperform Ashes of the Stars for damage, but again it's going to be a little bit more expensive. For your Watcher's Eye, you can get lightning penetration, that does a lot more damage. If you really want to splash out, you combine it with something else like precision damage, but they're probably crazy expensive. You could fit something in like an Enlighten, which means you can drop this cluster jewel here, frees up a couple of points on the tree. You can obviously get much better jewels here. You could get a better lethal pride. There's lots of things you can do to boost up the damage. So what we can do is just quickly have a look at the gear that I've stashed away that I had on my actual character. Just to show you that there's not a huge amount of difference. It's just the fact that they're much better rolled. The other thing that I've done, because these are fairly cheap, but they do take up 2 jewel sockets, is I've gone and grabbed the champion fortified ascendancy so that then I don't have to run fortify support and I get onslaught all the time and fortification even at the beginning of a map. So I don't have to worry about maybe the first 10 or 15 seconds when I'm slightly more vulnerable. I say these were cheap when I bought them. I think they were 2 divines and 1 divine. It's probably not the best use, but what that means is you can then drop fortify and you can put in awakened Ellie damage with attacks, get yourself immune to elemental reflect. And as you can see here, they are just better versions of what I've got on this character. So we've got the +2 and we've got well-rolled gloves with resistances, damage and attack speed. We've got the sword with the cold and lightning damage. I've then actually multi-modded it to get some double damage as well. The rings again are very similar, just much better rolled. I am running Voices of the Storm, but this actually isn't that great, and Ashes of the Stars actually does slightly more damage when you've got decent gear. The helmet is probably not much better than the one I've got on this build at the moment. The shield, again, is just better. It's got armor and evasion. It's got the avoid ailments. It's got resistances, and it's got suppression. The boots, again, similar, just better rolled all round. And same with the body armor. I've managed to craft this. It costs quite a bit of currency. So this has massive armor and evasion. It has fizz reduction. It's got resistances. Doesn't have any life, which is why I had that mastery to get the increased percentage life. And then I'll slot in an Enlighten because it means I can drop a few nodes of reservation on the tree. But all this combined cost quite a bit of currency, but it was a ton of fun to build. And I can pretty much, other than Ubers, because I suck at them, just run any content that I want to run. It's fun, and I know the build can get through it. I've comfortably leveled to 100, so it's nice and safe. But overall, it's a build that you can expand on if you like. The only other thing to mention is map mods that you can't run. You cannot really run no leech because you're just going to die. You're not going to have any form of recovery or way of getting your life back. Outside of a life flask, you're going to be using blood rage, things like burning ground, damage over time are just going to absolutely shred you. Reduce effect of auras you can actually run as long as it doesn't take your precision to below your accuracy cap. It will give you less damage and you'll take slightly more damage, but on its own, it's not a mod that you need to ignore. Reduce recovery is something I would avoid because you get 60% if you're also taking nodes on the tree to boost that up. That just means the more that goes up, the less leech you're going to have and the worse it's going to feel. On this version, we're not immune to elemental reflect, so you can't run that, but you can run fizz reflect. There are two that are bad, but you can get around them. The first is 25% reduced player accuracy. If you've got a higher level precision and your accuracy is way above your life, you can probably get away with this mod, but again, it's one I avoid. And then blind on hit. You can just use the Pantheon to get around that. That will stop your accuracy getting lowered. Anything else you can run. There's obviously combinations that are more dangerous, but there's nothing where you look at a map and say, I physically can't run that because either it's going to kill me or my build can't cope with that mod. There's two quick things I want to cover off that I forgot to include in the video. The first is how to find your lethal pride jewel. As I mentioned, you want one with 2 times strength, 1 times double damage. To do it, you just load up your POB for your character, go find timeless jewel. You want a lethal pride, wind dancer is the slot that it's in. Tick this filter node, and then what you do here is you can add nodes. So you can search for double damage. You just put a 1 at the end here to say that you want at least 1. Then we're going to go percentage strength, and we're going to say we want at least 2. And then you just press search. It will bring up a list of all of the options. So top one's going to be very expensive. Scroll down until it's 1 double damage. Click on one. Scroll a bit down. Hold shift. Click on another. And then copy trade URL. You then just paste that into your browser, and it will bring you a search for all the lethal prides that fit. It's likely that they're probably going to be a divine if people aren't price checking them, because that's what they tend to dump them in their tab at. But there's a few here for less. All you would do is just go through, whisper people, take the jewel, stick it in, job done. And then the last thing to go over is I'm going to be releasing a series of farming videos where we aim to just farm 100 divines profit as quickly as possible. And I'm going to be using this character to do it. So if you do build this character, there'll be some Atlas strategies coming out in the next few weeks that will suit the character. And then the idea is we just, see how quickly it takes to get 100 divines of profit using this 10 to 15 divine character. That is everything for the video. Hope it helps some people out and this sort of content is interesting. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.